So we are just rounding here, getting close to the end of the second quarter and the midpoint of the year. Just one full week left other than this past one. And then a partial week and we'll be halfway through the 2026 year. New listings for this last week from June 14th to June 20th, only 889 properties were added to the market. And so over the last 3 weeks alone, we've just watched the supply, weekly supply. First week of June was almost 1,100. Second week, 950. And now we're under 900 at 889. And so definitely seller activity, listings coming to the market is trending downward. And that's just something to be thinking about. I don't know if that's first the end of high season and that sellers are already kind of, if they weren't going to get it on the market in the early spring, now that's kind of slowing down. Or is it just the frustration of the higher interest rates and the lack of activity, and that the sellers, potential future sellers, are looking out and seeing the current sellers not really moving their properties, and they've decided not to step in and just add another stale listing to the inventory? I don't know. But interestingly, too, is the median list price for a single-family residence in this past week dropped. It had been in the 525 to 535 range for the last 6-8 weeks, and this past week it was only 500,000. So if sellers are tired, at least the ones that are coming to the market are being way more competitively priced in relationship or in comparison to the properties that have been coming at a median price level in the weeks before. Under contract units, again, another disappointing number. Only 551 units went under contract last week. That's down. It's the lowest we've seen in the last few months on a weekly number basis. We'd had 2 weeks of 617 and 643 at the first and second weeks of June. Dipping to 551 is really telling us that, the fears of inflation and the higher prices, the interest rates staying up because of the war and that inflation and the uncertainty in the economy. There's so many factors that are just slowing everyone down, buyers and sellers, and we're seeing that in the numbers. Sold units, 517 total sold units. That's kind of very flat, very stable for where it's been each of the 3 weeks of June. 503 in the first week, 525 in the second, and 517 in the third. Remember, the median sales price at the end of last month, at the end of May, jumped up to 495,000, and it was a big jump from the month before. But we're seeing now these last 2 weeks of June at a median sales price of 490,000. Even though that first week was 509, and the end of May, the very last week of May, we saw 510, which suggested that the median sales price might be climbing over 500 for the first time on record in Las Vegas, the median sales price of a single-family residence. But these past 2 weeks in June, the first 2 weeks of June, may suggest that we're not quite ready to cross that $500,000 mark. We'll be watching that. But again, these last 3 weeks of the low 500s of total units sold, and that being down, and it was the last week of the month to be expected, but we reached almost 700 units. But market staying pretty tempered, pretty calm as we move through the high season. And so, it's like we said. Okay, well, actually, let's jump back. Can we look at what was going on at this time in 2025? Let's just look at the 3 weeks of June in 2025 and see how this year and last year compare. Because one conclusion that I was about to make, and let's just see if it lines up, is that 2025 is really shaping up to be a lot like 2024. And our 2026 is shaping up to be a lot like 2025. And actually, if I just glance in on those numbers, if we go back to June, we can see that sold units were actually a little lower this time last year. We showed 500s, low 500s, and we were looking in the 450 to 500 range, not over 500, but for one end of the month. So maybe the activity's up a bit. Maybe it's 5% up, 7% up from last year. But really, overall, 2026 is shaping up to be very similar to 2025 so far as we reach the middle of the year. And so in all of that hope that we instilled into the community as we ended 2025, saying we hoped 2026 was going to be, and thought it might be upwards of 10 or so percent better in sales, that's not shaken out so far. But if you want to really know what's happened in the first half of the year and last quarter and what's going on in the Las Vegas real estate market, we're going to talk about that at the mid-year report, which is coming up here end of July. Be watching for an invitation opportunity to join in on that.